Welcome to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring in-depth interviews with a wide range of music personalities, from rock and roll Hall of Famers to Grammy winners and today's rising stars. Recorded from the Old Rock House in St. Louis, Missouri, here's your host, Aaron Perlott.
Welcome back to the Loadout Music Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Aaron Perlott. Now, today I'm joined by a friend and fellow American. He's a remarkable guitarist with a stellar hat collection, although he's not wearing one today, who often tours with my favorite songwriter and past guest in the show, Mr. Ray Wylie Hubbard. And this summer, you can find him playing a number of shows with Tuck Smith and the Restless Hearts. We welcome Tobin Dale to the show. Tobin, what's happening, man?
Hey, Aaron, thanks for having me.
Hey, it's great to have you on. You and I were kind of talking a little bit about just your career and where it started. And it seems like when you were in your late teens, I know you grew up in Florida near Orlando, but you kind of reached the Tom Petty pathway where you're like, screw this place. I'm going to LA and see if I can be a rock and roll star.
Absolutely. It's funny you picked up on that because I don't know if I mentioned Tom Petty, but obviously that was the blueprint. That was, I'm from Orlando, or kind of outside of it, but Tom Petty felt hometown enough to consider hometown hero. I mean, Gainesville is similar to, at least in my mind, what it was like where I grew up, where it's, he had the college right there. So it's not the total middle of nowhere, but it's also not the crossroads of the world. So you're kind of feeling like, limited in what you can do musically. So yeah, he was definitely that band in particular was the blueprint for let's go out west and kind of see what we can do. I didn't have a band like him. I left on my own, but otherwise, yeah, that was very much the model I was trying to follow.
Yeah, every year when I get my my records back from reports back from my streaming services, I get these doctor's notes that say that it's not advisable the amount of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers I've listened to in the past year, and it passes certain thresholds that are not advised by the 4 out of 5 Trident doctors. So it's
I've got a Lynn Goldsmith photo over here, print framed of him, that is in my living room every day when I wake up, and it's kind of a reminder. To me, he is the ultimate no compromises, accept no substitute. It has to be your best. The man never put out a bad song, in my opinion. Everything he did was great, and very few songwriters have a career like that, and then bands too. The fact that he kept, for the most part anyway, the bands stayed mostly the same for 30 or 40 years, and there's something to that. I don't know, there's a chemistry with those guys that just made it I think they're one of the best American bands, any band really. I'm probably in the same bracket of people listening to too much Tom Petty, but hopefully 1% of that will rub off, Mike Campbell or Tom's writing, or it's all stuff to learn from.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable though, like how many, like I think I have 5 different mixes that I created with his music, and each of them has like 25 songs on them, and they're all really good songs. And they might be like a mix of like the Heartbreakers, him solo, Mudcrutch, the Wilburys, or maybe him playing at Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with George Harrison or things like that. But it's unbelievable how many like great songs that dude wrote or was part of writing.
And he's one of those guys, to me, like Mick Jagger is kind of this way too, where they can take on a number of different personalities and characters, and they don't always, you always know it's Tom Petty, but like he can sing a country song and it doesn't sound inauthentic. It doesn't sound like somebody putting on a costume. It's like, wow, I believe every bit of that. And then he can turn around and do the deepest, rootsiest blues, like Muddy Waters type stuff, like that Mojo record. And I believe that every bit as authentic as his, Southern, or then he can have outright pop songs. And they all sound like him, but they're not anything like each other in a way. So like that's a really hard skill to have, where you're equally convincing in any character that you can kind of assume. You sell it so well, and he's the man. I play with another guy named Andrew Leahy, who plays with Elizabeth Cook. He's a fantastic songwriter too, and another Tom Petty devotee. And we played on the Outlaw Cruise, and we wanted to cover a Tom song, and we must have spent 4 hours going back and forth about which song to cover, because it's just, there's so many, and you want to do one that that everybody knows, but you don't want to do the obvious. And it's just, he's got so many. It's like, what do you end up doing? We ended up doing Saving Grace. That was like it's Highway Companion, so like 2006. We knew enough people would know it, but it's not one you hear every bar band in Nashville doing. So it was like, okay, that's a good choice. It's not a deep cut, but it's not something you hear on the radio every 10 minutes either.
We actually, with Atomic, the only Petty cover we do is we actually do Trailer, which a lot of people are unfamiliar with. And it was originally slated for the Southern Accents album. He ended up putting it out with Mudcrutch, like, you know, in the like mid 2000s or so. But a lot of people don't know that song, and it's such a great tune. It's simple. I mean, it's a really simple song, but that's, you know, to me, his greatness was like in his simplicity, but also the fact that, like Bob Dylan, Tom Petty did not have the greatest voice on earth. There wasn't this classic vocal delivery. And to have as many hit songs as he had with kind of a, I don't want to say average voice, because he could sing his material really well, but not have like this classic voice, like some singers, you know, some great singer-songwriters have. I think, to me, that's always been the true testament of his greatness, that he was able to have that many hit songs with kind of an voice, but just being such a great songwriter and having that great band.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely fall on the less is more side of things when it comes to music. You know, the virtuosic stuff is limited in its appeal to me, I would say. But you know, the two notes that Mike Campbell plays in some songs to me are 100% more memorable than, you know, the fastest or yeah, same with Tom's voice. It's like he might not have the range that some people do, or he might not have the, I don't know, just the power behind his voice of other singers. But man, you instantly know it's him when you hear him. And it's with guitar players, I feel like that's the sign of a master, is when you can hear one or two notes and know that's B.B. King or Brian May or whoever. You know, it's like that's the sign of a craftsman that's got their voice down that refined, where you instantly, you don't even know what song they're playing. You don't even have to have heard it before. You know it's them.
Yeah, yeah. And as much as I could go on talking for hours about Petty, I want to talk more about you.
I'm trying to talk about Tom Petty all day too, if you want. Maybe that's
We can do that another time in our private time. But so tell me though, I think you moved to LA when you were like 19. What was your, like, at what point did you get into music and you know, growing up at home and be like, you know, this is what I want to do? Like, what was your entryway? What was the entry drug for you into music?
That would be the Beatles. My parents both worked. I was kind of that generation before the internet completely raised kids and stuff. So I had to kind of find ways to occupy myself while both my parents were at work. And when I was really young, I'd have to go to my grandmother's house. And then after that, you know, I could kind of be left on my own. But she had a record player. And so I kind of got into listening to records just more for the novelty of it. It was kind of, you know, unique for kids to have a record player at that point. And so I started with what was there, and it was a lot of crap. I mean, it was, you know, theater, musical theater, you know, the soundtrack to the South Pacific, and just unlistenable. But there were like two or three Beatles records, and I was like, I like that. And so I started going to record stores and looking for more by the Beatles, and then that turned into just whatever covers look good. So it really was kind of like a discovery through just going to the record store and finding stuff that, you know, and then eventually the guy that, it was this place called Rock and Roll Heaven on Orange Avenue in Princeton in Orange in Orlando. But yeah, they started recommending stuff. And then when I was in high school and could drive myself, I just never left. It was like my home away from home, just trying to find more. And I loved holding the record because you could read all the liner notes, and it's like, oh, they didn't write that song. Who's McKinley Morganfield? I need to find out who that is. And, you know, that's Muddy Waters. Okay, I've seen his name before. And so it led to just connecting the dots that way. But the jumping off point where music like made me pay attention was definitely the Beatles.
At what point did you pick up a guitar and just start noodling?
Around that same time, and I was probably 12 by the time I got to that far along, to where I was really into the Beatles and wanted a guitar. You know, I had at least enough knowledge to know that the music they were making was, I think maybe at the same time I started seeking out their movies, because I think once I showed an interest, you know, my parents told me, oh, they've got movies too. And so seeing them with the guitar and realizing that was kind of the way to write songs, and that they were self-contained, you know, that they could write their own songs, and it's just the four guys, that really appealed to me. You know, and I guess through, I'm a recovering alcoholic. And so I do a lot of therapy and talking about, you know, childhood. And I think there was like a desire for that friend group that was a band. And, you know, as you'll probably relate to, it doesn't hardly ever work out that way. But at least in my mind, it was like, wow, those are your gang, right? That's your friend group for life. You guys are in it no matter what. And watching the Beatles do that was really appealing. And so I got a guitar around 12 or 13 to, in my mind, try to be like that and find my gang.
Yeah, so when you get to your, I'm assuming you kind of did what you know, a lot of folks do, play high school bands, things like that. So you get to be 19 and you're like, fuck it, I'm out. I mean, I'm going to go be a rock and roll star? What was the vision and drive in your mind?
I struggled to play in bands at home because nobody really liked that kind of music. This was like the Limp Bizkit, Slipknot days, or like System of a Down, all this real heavy down tune. I remember going to a kid's house in like eighth grade to play together, and he was like in C sharp or something, and I was like, why do we sound so terrible together? And now it's like, oh, he's like way drop tuned on like some Ibanez or whatever, and it just wasn't working out. So I would play with people, but I didn't really have a band. I went to college for a semester, and it was I worked at the radio station, which was cool. But other than that, I just kind of didn't like it. I was going into debt, and it was, real like emphasis on like fraternity and stuff that I just wasn't into. And I never felt like I connected with anything. And something clicked at that point that was like, you think you're taking the safe route, but this is obviously not bringing you any joy. And there's no guarantee that having this degree that you're working hard for is going to really relate to, it was an English major. So it's like, what are you going to do with that anyway? So at that, it was probably around 18, 19 that, yeah, it clicked. Like, I might as well just do what I enjoy doing and try to make that my career. I don't know why it didn't dawn on me before that it was possible. I guess I just didn't really know that people my age were still pursuing that as a career, because all the bands that I listened to were, old, for lack of a better word. There just didn't seem like but that Tom Petty model was sort of what I looked to at that point. It was like, well, maybe if I go out west and, just see what's going on out there. I worked at a music store, so they sent me to the NAMM show one summer, or one January, I mean, and I spent maybe a week out there and kind of saw that there's live bands playing out here, and there's like long-haired guys making rock and roll like I like, and it seemed like it was a little more possible there for some reason. It was also far away, which I will say also appealed. It was the farthest geographical spot in the country from where I lived, so there was something appealing about that too.
Yeah, I can certainly understand the kind of the need to create some separation between you and your hometown. So you get out to LA. I think the first band you joined was called Nasty Souls. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. They were a band that existed already and had a couple of songs recorded, but their guitar player was from Canada and he had some visa issues. So initially it was to fill in for a show, but I ended up joining the band pretty short order. But their first show was the Roxy. So it was like, I mean, I played a couple of bars and like jam type things, but I hadn't really had a show where your like names on a marquee and all that kind of stuff. And the first one was the Roxy on Sunset. So it felt pretty damn cool, I have to say. But yeah, they stayed fairly busy. I mean, we played pretty regularly in town, and then the first like real tour that I went on was with those guys. We flew to Philadelphia and just played up and down the East Coast for 3 weeks. And yeah, that was really the formative, like playing in a rock band era. I was about 21 at that point. Maybe it took some time once I got out there, to really find my crowd. But yeah, that was around that time.
Were you just, your first live show playing in the Roxy, were you just absolutely shitting your pants? Because I'm sure you knew all the big bands that had played on that stage. I mean, it's, kind of one of the hallmark venues in LA.
I had enough like just sitting in with people or doing like those blues jam club experience. I wasn't shitting up my pants about like the crowd or any of that, but yeah, there was definitely like a reverence for, Cheech and Chong and John Lennon, all these Bob Marley, these incredible shows that are, associated with the Roxy. Yeah, there was definitely that in the back of my mind. I was also, kind of young, and I don't know if arrogant is the right word, but just naive enough to feel like, yeah, of course, this is what's supposed to happen. There might have been taking it a little more for granted, now that I've been doing it for, as long as I have. And like, that some days, you play a place like that, and other days it's, Bob's Chuckle Hut and, East St. Louis, and there's two people. Having done a lot more of those gigs now, I can appreciate it even more. But at the time, I just felt like, yeah, this is what playing in a rock band is like.
Bob, yeah, unfortunately I've done more of those than I would like to admit, playing in front of somewhere between 2 and 10 people at a room that was maybe built to hold 500, and you're like, this is really doing a number on my self-confidence here.
I remember the most, honestly. I mean, the other ones are great, but they're over in the blink of an eye. But those are the ones that just stay with me. And when I'm falling asleep at night, I can't remember the name of the club, but I remember looking it up on Yelp on the way out there. It was in East St. Louis, and probably better I don't say the name anyway, but I can't think of it. But the first Yelp review said, this is the best place to go to get in a knife fight.
That must have been Pops then. So I do think that's the only rock and roll club that I can think of in East St. Louis. So and it's surrounded by strip clubs, so it's
that sounds right. And it was like steel workers and factory people on quitting. I mean, just we could have, yeah, we were a sideshow. It was they didn't care what we were, it was music fight they were ready to have.
Well, I know that you played in a couple bands when you were in LA. I think you also played with Caldwell Jack in the Six Pack.
Yeah,
And
they're in Nashville now too. I still see those guys occasionally, but that was we were the house band at the Kibitz Room, which is the bar next to Cantor's Deli, and I think the Wallflowers might have had a residency there in their early days. So it was a cool like teeth cutting experience because it was like a 4 hour gig, kind of like a Broadway thing where you just play with no breaks straight through, and you try to keep people in the room and dancing as long as possible. And so that was a great lesson because it's like, oh, wow, the guitar solos I think are so cool, kind of bore people after a while, or, they really like when you do the one note, even if you just, repeat that one note over and over again, people like it. It was really cool to see like the crowd dynamic at a place like that and learn some more of the performance art. So having a place like that to do that every single day was cool. And our keyboard player was a bartender there. So we would have like our regular residency, but then anytime another band couldn't do it or would drop out, we must have played there 100 times. It was great.
And that was around the time where you kind of stumbled into kind of substance abuse, and it kind of became a pretty big part of your life when you were in LA, right?
Yeah, well, as I said, the keyboard player was the bartender, so you can imagine the bar tab wasn't exactly being kept track of, with all honesty.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot of drinking, and to get through a 4 hour gig and play till 2 in the morning. Yeah, it was definitely part of it. Yeah, that I mean, I was drinking before then, but that was when it became associated with playing, and the two kind of became part of the same. The night involved both. Which really became a problem because it was like, in theory, I was doing everything I wanted to do, but it still kind of came second, even though I wasn't ready to admit that yet. It's like you're playing music, but the bigger point is you're getting to the state you want to get to. As long as you get that done, your performance can suffer, but you got to have your substance. So it started to become a problem at that point for sure.
Yeah, I know. And in all transparency, you and I, our relationship began through the aforementioned Ray Wylie and our shared sobriety, the three of us. But I mean, it's a pretty significant. Obviously, I've had some pretty significant problems, but it was became a pretty significant issue for you when you were still in LA, in terms of just being able to function.
Yeah, it was drinking was always my thing. I mean, I would do absolutely anything after I had started drinking. There wasn't anything I would say no to, but my drug of choice was definitely drinking, always was. And it was so accessible and so not really I didn't perceive it as a problem because it wasn't unusual. There were plenty of people with drinks in their hands when you go out, and there were plenty of people that played music that drank a pretty copious amount of alcohol. So it didn't feel weird, it felt like part of the lifestyle. And it, obviously LA encourages bad behavior to some extent, or at least, glorified it, or I had glorified it. And LA was the backdrop of many of the famous, the Jim Morrison stories, or, all the, Arthur Lee and all these just debauched stories of the Sunset Strip and all that stuff it was right there. And that was, in my mind, I'm living it. So, it felt like part of what you're supposed to do. But yeah, to try and actually, get anywhere and make this a career, which is what I want and still, I'm working on now. That's not something you can really have any longevity with, and really the truth is in these days, people don't really stand for that. It might be cute when you're 19 for a minute, but if you don't get your stuff together by the time you're an adult, it's not really looked upon very in vogue in these days. So, and maybe probably rightfully so. I think that's a good correction that we've made. Because I've learned now, and I don't know if this has been your experience, but since I got sober, it's like a lot of the people I idolized in my mind, as being these wild people have either died or calmed down. You know what I mean? Like yeah, Keith Richards is not still partying like it's 1972. He still has the outlaw image, but like he'll probably be the first to tell you he's in bed by 9 o'clock. It's like if you want to have a career, there's only so long you can get away with that.
Was it that what made the light switch kind of go on for you? Was there an aha moment? Was there someone that stepped in? What was it for you that really helped you kind of say, I got to be a fucking adult now?
Along the way, there were plenty of moments I should have had that aha moment. I mean, there were times, like just alcohol poisoning and, all that kind of stuff. And plenty of people had said things, but I guess I thought it was cool. I don't know. I just sort of didn't really listen to him for whatever reason. I had to have the experience myself. But it happened with that band Nasty Souls were on tour, and I was dropping the ball a little bit on stage, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna stay sober, and really was the first time I wanted it. There were times where I would say it, and then of course the next night you're out drinking again. But I never really wanted to not drink. And then I realized that though that was the case, I only lasted about 2 days and then I drank again. And that really scared me. It was like I made this decision that I'm just so that was the first signal I had that I'm not in control of this anymore. I'm not able to put my foot down and say enough. Like I said that and it still happened. So that really freaked me out. And that was in New York. I had a night where I was white knuckling it for the last few shows, and then we played in New York, and then you're let loose in New York as a functioning alcoholic, and the world is your oyster. And so, yeah, I woke up in a completely different part of the city in another borough. Everybody's mad at me because they couldn't find me. And, I'm having to navigate the subway back to wherever the bus was, and everybody's pissed and I'm hungover, and, people are like moving away from me on the bench on the subway. I'm like, God, I've been in New York 12 hours and I'm already the guy everybody's avoiding on the subway. That was pretty low, it felt like. So that was the day I was admitting I needed help. I may have had another drink, the next night or something, but that was where I started calling people I knew to be sober. By that point, I'd met enough musicians that didn't drink that I had the makings of what is now probably still my support group, like people that were playing music and not drinking.
Yeah, and I know when you ultimately joined Jason Heath and the Greedy Souls, that was kind of like the first time you were joining a band sober, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if everybody was, or a lot of those guys had some time. They were really active and did a lot of like we would play the Midnight Mission every Thanksgiving, and they were very involved in like giving back and with sobriety. And they worked a lot with Wayne Kramer in that Jail Guitar Doors program that he had. And so it was really cool because it was rock and roll guys, but it was totally different. It wasn't this like self-indulgent and party atmosphere. It was like helping people and kind of preaching is the wrong word, but like the sobriety message was part of it for sure. So that was really helpful for me because I've heard, a lot of friends that struggled to make music after they got sober because they were so closely linked. But I was lucky that I found this, band essentially of all sober guys that were doing it. And it was like the living proof that you can do it. And so it helped me get over those awkward, like first couple of, shows where you aren't kind of buzzed. So that was really helpful for me.
Yeah. And so ultimately you meet your wife, and was that in LA or was that in New York where you met your wife and you moved? I know that was
I lived in LA. My wife does wardrobe, so she does, bands wardrobe and also like, photos and video shoots and stuff. And so she was on the road with a band that came to LA, and neither of us can remember who, but she posted a message like, what should I do in LA? And somebody said, meet up with Tobin. You guys have similar taste. And we've looked and we can't find who that was, like some mutual friend, but whoever they are, we owe them a dinner because yeah, it obviously clicked. So we met. I lived out there. We became really good friends for probably a year, but before I moved. But yeah, that was. I mean, I won't say I moved entirely because of that. There were plenty of other reasons I was ready to get out of LA, but at the time, like it definitely was a tipping point. Like meeting her and knowing that this whole other thing was possible out here.
Yeah, and then I think it's pretty clear for anyone who's watching this on YouTube to know which one of us is married to a stylist and which one of us is not. So I look like
some of this is mine, but yeah, she definitely has her input as well.
My wife is a remarkable woman and she has incredible talents, but she leaves me alone when I think for better or worse to dress myself, and I think today at least we can clearly say it's for worse. But I know, when you moved to Nashville, you started meeting guys like I think we were talking about Alejandro Escovedo, who's been on the show before, and you played some time playing with Liz Brashers from Memphis. What was that experience like? Because I mean, I know today Nashville has become very you almost feel like you're in LA to a degree, but I'm sure when you moved there it was a very kind of different phenomenon for you to go from the scene in LA to the music scene in Nashville. What was that like for you?
The world that I was in LA, I don't know if this is typical, but at least the scene that I ran in was very band focused. Everybody was in a band. It wasn't about like I'm a guitar player so much as I play guitar for whoever. There was bands like Hammered Satin, my friends the Blessings. I mean, there's probably half a dozen or so of these like similar rock bands that all had their own flavor, but like it was very much like your tribal band thing. You didn't meet a lot of people, at least where I was hanging out, that played with 20 bands, which is the Nashville story. It's like you come here and it's more about I'm a guitar player for hire. kind of that mercenary hired gun sort of thing where you play with everybody you possibly can. That was a totally new adjustment for me. I think it's the way the world works now. There's not really one band that'll keep you busy enough to make a career. If you get lucky, it's not unheard of, but for the most part, you kind of have to be the hired gun in a lot of situations. And so that was a learning curve, to just kind of come from a world where it's like you're always playing, you rehearse twice a week and you play a show and, maybe one a month in town and then a few out of town. This was like, now you play with somebody different every single night and you learn their set, 20 minutes before you walk on stage with them. That was brand new to me.
Yeah, that must be really odd because I mean, I'm not one of those guitarists someone could say, yeah, this is the progression is 1-4-7 in G. Like I'd be like, give me some tablature to look at, explain how, I mean, I'm sure at this point in your career, you kind of take that for granted, but that's really, it's really hard for.
And I'm not really the best example of that because there's plenty of people that are more the like Swiss Army knife where they can literally do anything. I guess in acting you'd call it typecast, but I definitely get used for a specific thing that is fortunately something that I'm able to do naturally, I guess, which I can't really define it, but I guess it's retro is such a gross word, but like rock and roll that's influenced by rootsy or things. But definitely the Rolling Stones, Faces, Humble Pie type rock bands that are drawing from blues and southern music is sort of the world I occupy. I'm not going to get called for a lot of bands with slap tracks and snap tracks and play into tracks and that kind of stuff. It's just not the world that I run in. But in Nashville, there's guys that'll do everything. They'll be on a folk band one night and they'll be with a hip hop the next night. And that really is hard to do. I mean, that is a talent that requires I guess doing it over and over again, but also just sort of like a musical vocabulary that's all encompassing. It's hard to do. I feel like I'm one of the guys that kind of always sounds like me, and it can be limiting if that's what you're trying to do. Like I'm obviously not going to be the first call session guy because they'll want, somebody they can tailor into whatever they're trying to do. But I'm the guy where if you want it to sound like it came out in 1972, call that guy, at least in certain circles. So, which is lucky because it's, I do think it's better to try and be the best version of yourself than, the 34th version of whatever everybody else is shooting for. We already have Brent Mason and Tom Bukovac and Tim Pierce and all these amazing guitar players. So I just kind of do what I do.
Yeah. Now I know when you got to Nashville, eventually you hooked up with Julian Raymond, who's a producer at Big Machine, and he works with a lot of artists, and that kind of started you down a path getting in front of some other guys, right?
Yeah, I mean, I worked at a vintage guitar store in town, and that's my other passion is buying and selling vintage guitars, and so that was the way I'd make ends meet when there, wasn't a lot of gigs coming in, and that's how I met Julie. And so yeah, he started just using me for stuff like exactly what I was saying. If they had something where it was like, yeah, we kind of wanted to go more that direction. The first one was an artist named Alana Sophia. They wanted her to have like basically like Linda Ronstadt doing Tumbling Dice, and they wanted like a song that she wrote that sounded like that. So they brought me in to help her kind of write this like, Stonesy country song. And so yeah, he started using me for stuff like that. And one of them was a artist named Brock Gagne, who was kind of a traditional country artist, but he was going out with Ray as his opening act, and they needed like an auxiliary musician that could do slide guitar and kind of accompany him. And obviously I said yes because I'm a massive Ray Wylie Hubbard fan, and that was where that connection came from. But yeah, it started just opening up for him, and the second or third night, he's like, you want to come out and join us for a song? And then it was like, by the end of it, I was playing the whole night with him. He's got his son, Lucas, plays guitar too. And I could feel Ray's wheels clicking as we were doing it, like the two guitar thing. Especially coming from that Rolling Stones world, there's an art, it's not just rhythm and lead guitar. It's this, they call it the weave, where one takes off, and you either can do it or you can't. And Lucas is very good at it. And I feel like it's something I've had a lot of practice with. And so it felt natural. And I could tell Ray was into it. And so, yeah, we've been playing together since then.
Yeah. You're right. And that is such a hard thing to do. Keith Richards always talks about that was kind of the magic of the Stones, that he and Ronnie could play music and you couldn't quite tell which guitar was doing what because they had this, as you mentioned, the weave, they just blended together to make that Stones sound that so many people have since, tried to copy or parallel. And obviously the Faces with Ronnie in it had a similar DNA.
And even if they like AC/DC, I mean, they're playing the same chords, but not in the same spot. I always would watch those kind of bands and see like what there's two guitar players, what are they doing? And it's not like one's playing lead guitar the whole time. He's playing something that works against what the other one's playing. And it sounds like one big guitar. It sounds way bigger than if it was just two guitars playing the same A chord. If if you're doing it low and I do it high, you cover this huge tonal spectrum. And so learning that almost, I mean, I can't even say learning it. I can kind of analyze it now, but at the time it was just, why do they sound like that and trying to figure it out. So a lot of it's just guesswork and doing it over and over again. But yeah, like Lucas and I had only just met and we could kind of read each other in that way. And so, like I said, if you have that, if you've listened to that and you have that vocabulary and you just do it, it does kind of create a sound. I don't know. To me, it's integral to rock and roll, especially, rock music is a different thing, but rock and roll, that push pull, you kind of want just a little bit of he's fast, I'm slow, but we're, together. It's this kind of, it never comes off the rails, but it's never quite perfect either. That's a big part of it.
Remind me when Ray kind of first approached you to play, it was something about him asking you, he had seen you play on an old resonator and he asked you if you knew how to play You Got to Move. And what did you say to him?
He did. He said, he goes, you want to come up and do You Got to Move? I said, do you do the Fred McDowell Rolling Stones version? And he smiled. And it was like, you're in, our record collections are pretty similar. But yeah, that was the song we did together first. And I think he was doing the Stones arrangement of it. But yeah, Mississippi Fred McDowell's who wrote it. And so I think he appreciated that I knew that because, that's a big part of, I think the way I got where I am, at least in my view, is that it's not just stopping at the obvious, it's, I can't mention any names, but there's a lot of bands nowadays where you can tell they listen to one band and it's like, okay, that's great. But like, I had the desire to go like, who did they listen to? And then where did that person get it? And, eventually you're listening to, Leadbelly and the Louvin brothers and all these like records that were made, at the turn of the century. And that's really, I think that shows in your playing somehow. I feel like if you go down to the source deep enough, there's something there. I don't know. You tapped into a well that it all comes from.
What's it been like touring with Ray and his band? I know that, I saw you play at Red Rocks. You just got off the Outlaw Country Cruise. It seems like, even though Ray still plays a lot of like mid-sized clubs, it seems like that's been a great opportunity for you to get in front of, audiences that have a respect for his songwriting craft. And he has very knowledgeable music fans that follow him.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I'm obviously extremely grateful that I get to do that anytime to play with Ray, because he is such a, he hates the word legend. I think he prefers the word icon, but there really is a legendary myth around on him. And one of the things I think is so great about him is that he has this career that's got, multifacets to it. He started as a songwriter and he had, a band, the Cowboy Twinkies. And then, he had this like kind of career resurgence later on. And, he's managed to make it so much more than just had a couple of hits here and there. Like it's really is a career. It's a decades encompassing career that has a lot of different sides to it. And that's inspiring to me because it also, I think I'm 34 now, and it kind of, when I turned 30, there was sort of a panic attack moment of like, oh my God, it's all over. I'm 30. What am I going to do? And Ray said he didn't even play Letterman until he was, 65 or something. And like his first Opry was at 70. It's like, there's no point at which it's too late. That's a myth. And, you're the only thing stopping you. So that's a great lesson to have all the time and play out in front of me when I get to be around somebody like that. But you're right. His audience definitely, I think they flock to him because they appreciate the song, he's a writer unlike anybody else. He's obviously got influences by all these things, but like, Ray's song, you don't even have to hear him sing it to know he wrote it. There's just a, music and even with his words, there's a style to it. And I think real honest song fans could pick up on that. And so it's not even just one type of audience. There's country fans and rock fans. He's got Joe Walsh on songs with him and stuff. It's like, I think music lovers can tell this guy's the real thing. And that authenticity to me is what draws people to him.
Yeah, and the new record that he's working on right now, I know it's got Mike Campbell on it. Mike helped him produce a couple songs, and yeah. People, I guess, present company included, people really respect the guy, and they should, because he is a legend icon. Whatever he would rather not be called, he is.
think especially today with, music is in such a weird state where there's just all sorts of stuff coming at you all the time. And especially in country music, which, the debate has always raged about what is and isn't country, right? And I'm certainly not going to sit here and pretend to know or to even care. It's like, to me, there's good music and there's bad music. But with Ray, he's always just done what he does. You don't get the sense he's chasing some hit. He's not trying to get other people to cover his song and try to, pitch it to some other guy. Like he's just doing what he does. And, that kind of outlaw is a cliche, but like that kind of outlaw mentality of like, I don't care who does or doesn't like it. It's in me, and this is what I feel, and that it's that realness, and that to me always shows when somebody's, like we were talking about Petty and his voice, or Dylan or somebody. It's like, yeah, they don't have to make you love their voice. They just have to sell that what they're saying is something they really feel and make you feel it. And that earnestness is, to me, goes a lot more than just raw talent. And Ray has both. He can have extreme talent with words and then also sell you because it's the real thing. He's not some character. That's exactly who he is.
Yeah. I think you do bring up a good point today about like what is, you hear this debate endlessly, the conversation about what constitutes country and not. And to me, I see two dissections of it. Essentially, there's the pop influenced country music, which is what you hear on radio today. And then there's the rock and roll influence that is more roots influence and has more guitar driven, less electronic music. And to me, that's where I see the simple dissection of it. And I appreciate people went crazy when Beyonce dropped these two songs. And I'm like, well, they're very emblematic of what you hear on traditional country radio today. It's not vastly different. From the lyrics to the style to the instrumentation behind her, but go listen to Steve Earle play music, or listen to Hank Williams Jr. or whatever, from the 70s, actually from like the 60s, and even music made by the Byrds in Southern California to what you're hearing today. Even Stapleton, to me, Stapleton's a great example of one of the few people who's been able to get on mainstream country radio, but who plays more rock influenced country music.
Yeah. And I mean, there's always exceptions too. I mean, there's like the pop influenced country today is one thing, but and in the 70s, the outlaw movement was fighting against kind of the whole Nashville country politan type thing. Some of that stuff is fantastic. I mean, some of the Conway Twitty records, and I mean, even George Jones records of that time. I mean, George Jones was working with Buddy Sherrill. I mean, some of these guys were like the pop, hit makers of the day that they were working with. But no one's going to say George Jones isn't a real country singer. I mean, he's arguably the greatest. So I guess to me, what comes down to is like the person making the music, if I believe them, if it's real. And a lot of times the music I like is at least my perception of it is it's the outsider, it's the outsider's view of things. So even like I'm a massive reggae fan, and obviously like, I guess music of the oppressed in a sense. I mean, blues, country was like a blue collar kind of viewpoint, but a lot of these are the stories of people that are on the outside that are trying to better themselves or trying to come up against big odds. And if you're doing that and you're Beyonce, it's hard to believe you're a billionaire. But if you're doing it and you're George Jones, he's also a multimillionaire, but something in that voice, man, I just believe this guy feels whatever he's telling me. And you can't help but have your heartstring pulled at. And I don't know, I guess authenticity is a hard word to define, but you can hear it. At least I can, whether I believe somebody. And that's really what makes something good to me, is if I believe you mean it. And with everything that becomes popular, you have the guys that are doing it all along, and then the people that are doing it because it's in vogue. And, it becomes easy to kind of sniff that stuff out, especially if you're immersed in it, as a music fan.
Yeah. I know this summer, well, right now you're working on, from what I gather, two projects. You mentioned Andrew Leahy before, who was in Elizabeth Cook's band. I know you're working with on a project with him, Andrew Leahy, and the Homestead, and then you're going to be touring with Tuck Smith this summer, right?
Yeah, I don't know if there's dates that are announced just yet, but yeah, I've started doing some stuff with him here recently, so that's all pretty new. But yeah, that's the plan at least. And then same with Andrew, that's fairly new, but we did that Outlaw Country cruise and it went great, and I love that whole band, and so definitely look forward to working with both those guys. Yeah, just good music. And Andrew's another guy like that too, where it's the Outlaw Country cruise, but he's kind of more Tom Petty rock influence. So yeah, it's a cool, place to be at, where I'm doing all sorts of music that I really love. I think that's the the thing I use is like my metric is like, do I enjoy this music? Because like it'd be easy to just go get a job. If I hate what I'm doing, why even bother? You know, that what makes that different than a desk job if you're miserable? So I have to play music I actually enjoy, and both those guys make fantastic music. So, and obviously Ray is the same. You know, being on his new record, it's music I would buy if I had nothing to do with it. You know, and that's a cool thing.
Awesome, man. Well, Tobin Dale, thank you so much for being on the Loadout Music Podcast. It's been a real joy having you on the show.
Thanks. It's been an honor to come on. And yeah, you've got a lot of those guys we're talking about on this show. It's great watching them, and it's an honor to be part of it.